My stepson thought he was broken down there. So I showed him why he's not real forbidden care. He came to me, eyes down, voice shaking, said he couldn't face anyone. Not even himself. I should have walked away, but I didn't. And what happened next still keeps me up at night. I never thought I'd say this out loud. Not even to myself. But it happened, and I can't unlive it. My name is Marissa Hayes. I'm 45, divorced, and still trying to figure out who I am when I'm not someone's wife. Or someone's problem to fix. I live quietly now, in a small town tucked between mountains and silence. People know me as the polite HR manager who always remembers birthdays and never causes drama. What they don't know is that my stepson came back into my life when I least expected him, and changed everything. Tyler was just a boy when I married his father. He was quiet, guarded, painfully polite, and I tried my best to love him without overstepping. His father never gave him much space to speak. Honestly, I didn't either. I was so focused on making the marriage work, on surviving, I didn't notice Tyler shrinking. Years passed. The marriage crumbled. His father left, but then Tyler returned. He was 18, taller, still quiet, but with something heavy in his eyes. He didn't come back for his dad. He came back to stay with me. Just for a little while. He said, until school started again. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I thought I was doing something good. I didn't think I'd find myself alone with him in a cabin in the woods. A storm rolling in, the power gone, and the only warmth between us being what neither of us was willing to name. I didn't think I'd become the one he confided in, about a shame he'd carried for years. And I definitely didn't think I'd be the one who helped him unburden it. But here I am, and this is what happened. After the divorce, the silence in the house felt louder than any fight we ever had. I stayed because I thought I was supposed to. For the house, the routine, the illusion, but the truth? I'd been alone long before my marriage ended. I slept on one side of the bed, cooked meals for someone who barely looked up from his phone, and cried in the shower so no one would hear. Eventually, I stopped crying. That scared me more. I told myself I didn't need anyone. I had my work, my books, my early morning walks. I smiled at neighbors, sent thank you emails, baked banana bread for the office. On the outside, I was fine. Inside, I was fading. When Tyler called asking if he could stay with me, just for a bit, I said yes without thinking. Maybe I was desperate for a voice in the house again. Or maybe I wanted a second chance at being seen, at doing something right. I didn't expect the quiet boy I once knew to come back taller, colder, and carrying something I couldn't name yet. But I welcomed him in anyway. Because loneliness has a way of mistaking echoes for connection. Tyler had always been quiet, not shy, just observant. As a kid, he'd sit at the dinner table in silence, pushing food around while his father droned on about work. He never interrupted, never asked for seconds. He was the kind of boy who apologized when he coughed too loud. Back then, I tried to connect. I really did. I'd leave notes in his lunchbox, ask about his favorite books, offer to take him to the movies when his dad bailed. Sometimes he smiled. Most of the time, he just nodded and disappeared into his room. Over the years, the distance grew. His father barely acknowledged him. I started fading too. I stopped asking, stopped noticing the weight in his eyes. Looking back, that's what I regret the most. Not what happened later, but the years I stayed silent. When he showed up at my door again, suitcase in hand and hoodie pulled low, I barely recognized him. He was taller now, stillness wrapped around him like armor. His eyes were tired, older, but when I hugged him, awkwardly, gently, he held on longer than I expected. We didn't talk much at first. Shared space like roommates. I made dinner. He washed dishes. Quiet rhythms, unspoken understanding. But one night, I heard him crying, not loudly, just soft. Broken sounds behind a closed door. And something inside me cracked open. He wasn't a boy anymore. And I wasn't just his ex-stepmother. We were two people, quietly unraveling, under the same roof. It started with the storm. We'd planned the cabin trip weeks ago, just a few days away before Tyler's classes resumed. A reset, I told him, somewhere quiet, somewhere clean. The cabin was small but cozy, pine floors, thick blankets, a fireplace I didn't know how to light until he showed me. We unpacked slowly, shared dinner without saying much, then curled into separate corners of the sofa with our own thoughts. I remember thinking, this is what healing looks like. Simple, peaceful. But that night, the power went out. No warning, just a crack of thunder. And everything went black. I reached for my phone. But the signal was gone too. Tyler lit a candle from the kitchen drawer. The flame danced between us, soft and golden, and in that flicker, I saw him differently, his face half-shadowed, eyes reflecting the light like glass. I can start a fire, he offered. It might get cold. I nodded, watching as he moved, methodical, quiet, grown. His hands were steady, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Something weighed on him. Later, after the fire caught, we sat near it, both wrapped in blankets, close, but not touching. The silence was heavy. I don't think I'm normal, he said suddenly. I turned to him. What do you mean? He didn't look at me, just stared into the flames. Something happened with a girl. She said I was too much, that I freaked her out. My heart clenched. I wanted to say the right thing, but all I could do was reach for his hand. And in that moment, surrounded by wind, firelight, and the weight of unspoken things, I felt the distance between us collapse. Not completely, not yet. But enough to know something was coming. His hand in mine felt fragile, like holding something already broken. I squeezed gently, not to comfort him, but to steady myself. Tyler, I said softly, there's nothing wrong with you. He shook his head. She laughed, when she saw me, said I looked unnatural, then told everyone. He was trembling. I could see it now, the way he sat just a little too still. Like his own body betrayed him. I felt a wave of guilt crash over me, not because of what she said, but because I knew, deep down, this wasn't the first time he'd been made to feel less than human. I'm sorry, I whispered. I should have protected you better back then. He looked at me, finally, eyes red, jaw clenched, holding something that wasn't just pain, it was shame. Old, heavy, rooted. I just wanted to be seen. Like, not disgusting. Those words didn't come from an 18-year-old boy. They came from a child who'd learned to shrink every time someone looked his way. Before I could stop myself, I cupped his face. My thumb brushed the corner of his eye. His breath hitched. You're not disgusting, I said. You're. He leaned in, just barely, not a kiss, not yet, but something hung in the space between us. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. My lips grazed his temple. A pause. His forehead pressed to mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman fixing someone. I felt like someone who finally saw and was seen. We didn't speak after that. We didn't need to. Because in that moment, the air between us changed. Not loud, not sudden. Just one quiet breath that we both decided not to take back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind press against the windows, the fire crackling down to soft embers. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, open, wounded, trusting. I hadn't meant to blur the lines, but they were never that clear to begin with. At some point, I heard the soft creak of the floorboards, barefoot steps moving slowly, then, a knock, barely audible. Marissa? His voice was small, unsure. I opened the door. He stood there, shirtless, flannel pants low on his hips. The firelight from the living room danced behind him, casting long shadows. I can't sleep, he said. My head's too loud. I stepped aside. Come in. He didn't sit, just stood there in the middle of the room, arms crossed, chest rising with shallow breath. Can I ask you something? I nodded. He looked at me like he didn't want to say the words out loud. Can you show me I'm not broken? My heart stopped, not out of fear, out of knowing. I walked to him, slowly, carefully, like approaching something sacred. I placed my hand gently on his chest, felt the frantic beat beneath. This isn't about fixing you, I said softly. It's about helping you feel whole again, but only if you want that. He nodded, wordless, breathless. And so I showed him, not through instruction, not through dominance, but through patience, through presence. Every touch was deliberate, gentle, measured, my fingers tracing the edges of his shame until they became something softer. Something human. He trembled, not from arousal, from release. From the weight he'd carried for too long. There were no loud moans, no wild gasps, just a soft exhale when it was over. He leaned against me, forehead to shoulder, and whispered, "Thank you." I didn't reply, I just held him. Not as a mother. Not as a woman trying to feel wanted. But as someone who finally understood what it meant to be trusted with someone's deepest wound. And not flinch. The next morning, the cabin felt colder. Not in temperature, Tyler had stoked the fire again before dawn, but in atmosphere. The silence between us wasn't comfortable anymore. It was cautious, fragile. I found him in the kitchen, already dressed, slicing fruit with practiced distraction. He didn't look up when I entered. Didn't say good morning. "Sleep okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. He nodded, "Yeah." I waited for him to say more. He didn't. We sat at the table with 2 mugs of coffee between us and a plate of toast that neither of us touched. The air felt thick, full of unspoken thoughts that hovered just beneath the surface. I watched him from across the table, his eyes locked on the window. Jaw tight, the muscle ticking in his cheek. He wasn't avoiding me, he was avoiding what we'd done. And the truth is, I didn't know what to do either. I wasn't ashamed of what happened, but I wasn't proud of it either. It lived in that gray place, between intention and instinct, comfort and desire. When he finally looked at me, it was brief, just a flicker of eye contact that felt like 1,000 questions he wasn't ready to ask. "I'm gonna take a walk," he mumbled, standing before I could respond. He grabbed his hoodie and stepped out into the cold. I stayed seated, hands wrapped around my mug, the steam rising into my face. Had I crossed a line? Had he? Or had we just stepped into a space no one talks about, a space where loneliness and care wear the same disguise? I didn't regret being there for him. I regretted not knowing how to hold what came after. The silence lingered long after he left the room. And for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I was the adult in the story anymore. Or just another person looking for something warm to hold on to. That afternoon, while Tyler was still out walking, I found myself cleaning the kitchen just to stay busy. Not because it was dirty, but because I couldn't sit still with the noise in my own head. What we'd done wasn't planned. It wasn't calculated, but that didn't make it easier to understand, or live with. I kept going over it, every glance, every breath, every unspoken thing that had passed between us the night before. There wasn't shame exactly, but there was something heavier, something older. And then, like a weight from the attic, it dropped on me. The memory came back sharper than I expected. It was 3 years ago, a Sunday afternoon. Tyler was 16. I had walked into the den and heard his father shouting. Not angry, mocking. "You'll never be normal with that thing. You think a girl's gonna want to deal with that mess?" Tyler had sat frozen on the couch, shoulders hunched, eyes wide, humiliated. And me? I'd just stood there. Frozen, embarrassed, silent. I hadn't stepped in, I hadn't said a word. I hadn't even touched Tyler's shoulder when he rushed past me, disappearing into his room. That moment had buried itself deep, and now it was back, clear as the firelight, raw and unforgiving. Was last night really about him? Or was it about my guilt? My need to make up for all the times I didn't speak? I told myself I was helping him heal. But was I also trying to heal something in me? A failure I'd been too afraid to name? The door opened. Tyler stepped inside, cheeks pink from the cold, hoodie damp with snow. He looked better, calmer, but still guarded. He glanced at me and paused. "You okay?" he asked. I smiled too quickly. "Fine." He didn't push, just nodded and headed toward his room. And as I watched him walk away, a part of me wanted to call out, to explain, to confess that last night wasn't just comfort. It was an apology, a delayed act of courage, years too late. But I stayed quiet. Again. Because I didn't know which truth would break him more. The one he lived with. Or the one I'd kept hidden until now. The next evening, Tyler was quiet again, but not distant. There was a subtle shift in how he moved around me. Softer, more at ease. He even made a joke at dinner. Something dry and half mumbled about my terrible pasta sauce. I laughed too loudly, grateful for the tension finally breaking. We watched a movie afterward, something old and slow with too much piano. He sat close, not touching, but near enough that I could feel the warmth of him along my side. And for a few hours, I let myself believe we'd moved past the weight of what happened. But then, I found the camera. It was in the living room, tucked high in the corner above the fireplace. A small black lens embedded in the wood beam, blinking faint red. I don't know how I hadn't noticed it before. My stomach dropped. It looked old, possibly installed by a previous renter or part of the cabin's security system. But it was powered, active. And it had been facing us the entire night. I didn't say anything right away. Tyler was still on the couch, eyes closed, head tilted back like he was finally resting. I walked into the kitchen and sat down hard. If it had recorded what happened. If someone had access to that footage. If this place belonged to someone who checked the feed remotely. I felt my hands start to shake. This wasn't just ours anymore. Whatever we were, whatever had passed between us in that flickering firelight, might now exist somewhere outside this cabin. On a screen, in someone's hands, vulnerable, exposed. I couldn't breathe. And worse than the fear, was the realization that part of me wasn't afraid for me. I was afraid for him. He had just started to unburden something that had haunted him for years. Just started to trust again. Just started to feel human. And now, someone might strip that from him all over again. I turned to look at the hallway where he'd just disappeared. If he ever found out about the camera, I didn't know what it would do to him. But one thing was certain. We hadn't left the shadows. We had just stepped into a deeper one. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake in the dark, listening to the wind move through the trees outside, the soft creaks of the old cabin shifting under winter's weight. The fire had long gone out, but I didn't dare move. I didn't want to disturb the silence. It was the only thing keeping me together. The camera still blinked. It sat there above the fireplace like an open eye, watching. Recording, waiting. I had unplugged the router just after midnight, but I knew it was too late. If anything had been sent, it was already out there. I wanted to protect him. That was always the truth beneath the mess. Beneath the guilt. Beneath the strange, warm, dangerous tenderness. I wanted to give Tyler the one thing no one else ever had: safety. Wholeness. The chance to feel seen without shame. But I might have failed him again, this time. In a way I couldn't undo. The next morning, he looked at me differently. Not colder, not scared, just searching. "Did something happen?" he asked. I hesitated. "No, I lied." He nodded slowly, said nothing else. And in that pause, I felt the full weight of what I was choosing to carry alone. Maybe I was trying to protect him. Or maybe I was just afraid of losing the only connection that had felt real in years. Maybe both. We left the cabin 2 days later. Neither of us spoke about what happened again. But sometimes, I wonder if he still thinks about it, about that night. About me, about the way we blurred the edges of who we were supposed to be. And I wonder what you would have done. If someone trusted you with their pain, raw, naked, real. And in comforting them, you crossed a line you never intended to. Would you take it back? Or would you hold on to it, quietly? Because for the first time in years, you both felt like you belonged somewhere? Be honest. Not with me. With yourself. Would you have pulled your hand away, or held on just a second longer?